Hey Reddit. I never thought I'd be the type to air my dirty laundry on the internet, but here I am, seeking some advice and maybe a bit of catharsis. Let me take you on a journey of how my relationship with my neighbor, which started with a simple misunderstanding, has escalated to what feels like an all-out war. Strap in, because this is going to be a long one. It all started innocuously enough. I moved into my house about 2 years ago. The neighborhood was perfect, quiet, friendly, and close-knit. My next-door neighbor, who I'll call Tom, seemed like a nice enough guy. We exchanged pleasantries, shared a few beers, and everything seemed fine. That is, until the day of the lawn gnome incident. You see, I have this quirky little lawn gnome collection. Nothing too extravagant, just a few colorful statues scattered around my front yard. One day, I noticed one of my favorite gnomes was missing. I thought it might have been stolen, but later that day, I saw it sitting on Tom's lawn. I assumed it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the wind blew it over, or maybe some kids were playing a prank. So I went over and politely asked Tom if he had seen my gnome. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "Nope, haven't seen it." I pointed out the gnome on his lawn, and he said, "Oh, that? I found it in my yard this morning, figured it was mine." At this point, I was a bit annoyed, but I didn't want to start a feud over a gnome. I explained that it was part of my collection and politely asked for it back. Tom hesitated, but eventually handed it over. I thought that was the end of it, but boy, was I wrong. A few days later, I woke up to find all my gnomes turned around, facing away from the street. It was weird, but I laughed it off, thinking it was a harmless prank. I turned them back around and went about my day. The next morning, they were turned around again. This continued for a week, and I was starting to get irritated. Then came the noise complaints. Tom started complaining about every little noise coming from my house. If I had friends over for a BBQ, he'd call the cops. If my dog barked for more than a minute, he'd be at my door, complaining. I tried to be considerate, but it felt like nothing I did was good enough. One weekend, I was working on a DIY project in my garage. I wasn't using any power tools, just hammering some nails. Tom came over and yelled at me for making too much noise. I told him I was almost done, and he stormed off, muttering under his breath. Things really took a turn when my trash cans started disappearing. I'd put them out on the curb for pickup, and the next morning, they'd be gone. I found them down the street, tipped over, and garbage scattered everywhere. I knew it was Tom, but I had no proof. So I decided to get a little payback. I installed a security camera facing my driveway and waited. Sure enough, the next trash day, I caught Tom red-handed, dragging my trash cans down the street. Armed with video evidence, I confronted him. He denied it, even when I showed him the footage. He said it was doctored and accused me of trying to frame him. Fed up, I took the issue to our homeowners association, HOA. They reviewed the footage and sided with me, issuing Tom a warning. Tom was furious. He started spreading rumors about me to the other neighbors, saying I was a troublemaker and trying to get everyone on his side. I tried to rise above it, but it was hard. Some neighbors started avoiding me, and I felt like I was being ostracized. The final straw came when I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox, accusing me of being a bad neighbor and suggesting I move out. Feeling isolated and stressed, I decided to extend an olive branch. I baked some cookies and brought them over to Tom's house, hoping to talk things out. He answered the door, took one look at the cookies, and slammed the door in my face. Since then, things have been at a stalemate. The gnome turning stopped, the trash cans stayed put, and the noise complaints ceased, but the tension remains. We avoid each other, and there's a palpable sense of animosity in the air. So Reddit, what do I do? How can I mend this relationship, or is it beyond repair? Has anyone else dealt with a situation like this? I'm open to any advice you might have. Thanks for reading my saga. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Update 1. Hey Reddit. First of all, thank you all for the overwhelming support and advice. I was genuinely touched by how many people took the time to read my post and offer their thoughts. A lot has happened since I last posted, so here's an update. A few days after my post, one of the more senior neighbors, Mrs. Johnson, approached me. She's been living here for decades and knows everyone. She told me she had heard about the feud and offered to mediate a discussion between Tom and me. Reluctantly, I agreed. I figured it couldn't hurt to have a neutral party involved. Mrs. Johnson arranged a small meeting at her house. It was awkward at first. Tom was clearly not thrilled to be there, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Mrs. Johnson started by laying some ground rules and encouraging us to speak openly but respectfully. What came next was surprising. Tom revealed that he had been dealing with a lot of personal issues over the past year. He had recently gone through a messy divorce and was struggling with his mental health. He admitted that he had taken out his frustrations on me, and the situation with the gnome was just a tipping point for him. Hearing this didn't excuse his behavior, but it did provide some context. I shared my side of the story, explaining how his actions had affected me and how I just wanted to live peacefully in the neighborhood. Mrs. Johnson helped us navigate the conversation, and by the end, we had come to a tentative understanding. Tom apologized for his behavior, and I apologized for any misunderstandings on my part. We agreed to try and start fresh. Tom promised to stop the petty actions, and I agreed to be more mindful of any noise or activities that might bother him. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a start. We shook hands, and while things are still a bit tense, there's a glimmer of hope that we can move past this. Thanks again for all your advice. I'll keep you updated on how things progress. Update 2. Hey Reddit! I wanted to give you another update on the situation with my neighbor Tom. Things have been a bit of a roller coaster since our mediated conversation, but overall, I think there's been progress. For the first few weeks after our meeting at Mrs. Johnson's house, things were noticeably better. Tom stopped with the noise complaints and the trash can incidents. We even managed to have a few friendly exchanges, just small talk, but it was a significant improvement. I also made an effort to keep my noise levels down, especially in the evenings. I think this mutual effort helped to ease some of the tension. Some of the neighbors who had been avoiding me started to warm up again, and it felt like the neighborhood was getting back to normal. Unfortunately, not everything has been smooth sailing. Last weekend, I hosted a small barbecue with a few friends. We kept the music low and the conversation moderate, but around 9 p.m., Tom showed up at my door looking visibly upset. He complained that the noise was still bothering him and that he couldn't get any peace. I apologized and told him we'd keep it down even more. He left without saying much, but the next day I found a note in my mailbox. It wasn't signed, but I'm pretty sure it was from Tom. The note accused me of not keeping my word and suggested that if I couldn't keep things quiet, he'd have to involve the authorities again. I'm at a bit of a loss. On one hand, I understand that Tom is dealing with personal issues, and that he might be more sensitive to noise than others. On the other hand, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home. I'm considering reaching out to Tom again, perhaps suggesting another mediated conversation with Mrs. Johnson, to find a more lasting solution. I don't want to escalate things further, but I also don't want to live in constant fear of upsetting my neighbor. What do you think, Reddit? Should I try to talk to Tom again, or is there another approach I should consider? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Final update. Hey Reddit. I wanted to share what will likely be my final update on the situation with my neighbor Tom. It's been a journey with many ups and downs, but I'm happy to report that we've reached a resolution. After the barbecue incident and the anonymous note, I knew something had to change. Living in constant tension wasn't sustainable for either of us. I decided to reach out to Mrs. Johnson again, hoping she could mediate another discussion. She agreed, and we set up a meeting for the following weekend. This time, the conversation was different. Instead of focusing on past grievances, we talked about what we wanted for the future. Tom opened up even more about his struggles. He admitted that his sensitivity to noise and disturbances stemmed from his ongoing battle with anxiety and depression. He also shared that the divorce had left him feeling isolated and on edge. I shared my perspective, emphasizing my desire for a peaceful and friendly neighborhood. I told Tom that I was willing to make adjustments, but I also needed to feel comfortable in my own home. Mrs. Johnson helped guide the conversation, ensuring we both felt heard and understood. We brainstormed ways to coexist peacefully. Here are some of the solutions we came up with. 1. Quiet hours. We agreed on designated quiet hours, especially during evenings and weekends. This would help Tom manage his anxiety and give me clear guidelines to follow. 2. Communication. We decided to establish better communication. Instead of escalating issues immediately, we would talk to each other first. This way, small problems wouldn't spiral out of control. 3. Support network. Mrs. Johnson suggested creating a neighborhood support network. This would involve regular gatherings and check-ins to foster a sense of community. Tom was hesitant at first, but agreed to give it a try. Since implementing these changes, things have improved significantly. The quiet hours have helped Tom feel more at ease, and I've been more mindful of my activities. We've had a few casual conversations, and while we're not best friends, there's a mutual respect that wasn't there before. The neighborhood support network has been a surprising success. We've had a couple of gatherings, and it's brought everyone closer together. Tom has even started to participate more, which I think has helped him feel less isolated. This whole experience has taught me a lot about patience, empathy, and the importance of community. It's easy to get caught up in our own perspectives and forget that others might be going through their own battles. By taking the time to listen and understand, we were able to find common ground and build a more harmonious environment. Thank you, Reddit, for all your support and advice throughout this ordeal. It's been a wild ride, but I'm grateful for the lessons learned and the positive outcome we've achieved. Here's to hoping for continued peace and cooperation in the neighborhood.